Most Americans remember their war dead on Memorial Day, but there's a small group of veterans fighting for special recognition every June 8th. That's the day in 1967 that the USS Liberty was attacked, surprisingly, by the State of Israel during Israel's six-day war with Egypt. 34 crew members died. The survivors say new information coming to light proves it wasn't all a big mistake.
After my brother was killed, it destroyed the family basically as a cohesive unit.
In a small upstate town called Fish's Eddy, you can still hear the echoes of a military attack that's barely made the history books.
Carl come home at Easter and he asked his father how it would be if he was hit by a bomb. June it was.
June 8, 1967, the day Israel fired rockets, burning napalm, and torpedoes at an Allied ship, the USS Liberty. It was day 4 of Israel's own six-day war with Egypt.
And I was on the way down the ladder when I started hearing all the metal hit topside.
The Liberty attack took place in international waters in the eastern Mediterranean.
The torpedo that hit us at 2:35. The attack started at 2 o'clock.
10 dead on the deck originally. The rest of the dead were due to the torpedo hit after the fact. And I saw the entire front of the ship lift up out of the water. We weren't a combat ship.
What the Liberty was an intelligence gathering ship working for the National Security Agency. Carl Nygren and his fellow Navy crew members trained to decipher foreign languages and codes.
He was a linguist, knew 5 languages.
The United States wanted to know what the Russians were up to during the war. They wanted to know whether the Egyptians were using Russian bombers.
A message for Liberty to pull back never reached the ship, and that's where the debate starts about why Israel attacked.
But it was a mistake. It was a mistake.
You didn't know it was an American ship?
We didn't know it was an American ship. People thought at the beginning that this was an Egyptian ship, an Arab ship.
But Liberty's crew has long maintained Israeli air forces were flying low enough to clearly see the American flag.
Well, I, for one, know that our flag was flying, and I know for a fact they knew who we were.
Author James Bamford, in his new book, Body of Secrets, says American pilots nearby told him they heard the Israeli Air Force and Navy make reference to the flag.
They heard the crew members of both the plane and the torpedo boat talk about the American flag.
Basically what they saw was red. And then they stopped, and then Israeli ships approached the Liberty and offered help. And the reaction was apparently shooting.
Researchers have long speculated Israel attacked because it didn't want the Americans intercepting military communications about Israel's pending assault on the Golan Heights. When the Liberty attack was over, 34 American crew members were dead and 171 wounded. 821 rocket and machine gun holes were counted in Liberty's hull. Crew members say Israel even fired at lifeboats after one of its 5 torpedoes had already smashed a 40-foot hole in the ship's side, a section where 25 intercept operators were working and killed.
I spent 2 days down there cleaning up those 25 guys. When I was debriefed, I was told not ever to talk about it to anybody.
And back in New York, Jan Nygren remembers coming home from 6th grade when his family got the Navy telegram. Carl Nygren was dead at 23. His little brother went back to school.
It was about 5 minutes later my parents walked in. Took me out of school. It's one of the major things I remember. It was like a sledgehammer.
A U.S. Navy Board of Inquiry ultimately agreed with Israel's explanation that it made a tragic mistake, even though Bamford reports one NSA memo called the conclusion a whitewash. Israel apologized and paid $12 million in reparations to the U.S. families.
Money don't do it.
34 years later, the families of the dead and the survivors still smart from the lack of an official U.S. congressional investigation into the attack, which killed twice as many military men as the bombing of the USS Cole. The wounded captain of the Liberty, who refused medical attention for 17 hours to stay with his ship, received the Medal of Honor, but went to his deathbed in 1999, still calling for the U.S. and Israel to release all details relating to the attack.
It's a very delicate topic. Nobody wants to touch Israel. Nobody wants to criticize Israel.
When something horrible like this happens, whether it was an accident, even though it was an accident, Certainly, having new facts before us would be worthwhile.
Philip Armstrong Jr.
This past Friday, June 8th, the 34th anniversary of the Liberty attack, a small group of survivors and relatives of the dead returned to Arlington National Cemetery, where 6 of the crew members are buried in a mass grave. Don Pagalar says it took him 20 years to confront his grief.
I took my Purple Heart and stuffed it in a drawer and never wanted anybody to know that I had it. Because I wasn't hurt or I didn't die.
Started having nightmares. I didn't realize why I was having nightmares until I was about 31, 32. I cry for him every morning when I go into work.
At the NSA Museum, the ribbon once tied to Captain McGonagall's Medal of Honor now sits with his Navy dress hat and glasses. All that's left of the Liberty is its general alarm and holiday flag. The ship was scrapped in 1968. This report was researched and co-produced by Caesar Darius, our managing editor.